$113. This is what India paid per barrel of crude when America went to war with Iran and shut the Strait of Hormuz. 4 months, a 64% price spike. Iraq's oil stopped flowing. Gulf routes went dark. India scrambled across 40 countries just to keep its refineries running. It even needed Washington's sanctions waiver to buy Russian oil. Now, after Tehran and Washington have signed a peace deal, India still faces a new energy challenge. Russia, which supplied record crude to India during this phase, is now the target of Ukraine. With the Hormuz still extremely volatile, India's energy options remain unpredictable. But India may still end up as the Iran war's biggest energy winner. The peace deal has lifted sanctions on Iran for at least 60 days. India has a rare opportunity to return to Iranian crude at a discount, reopen Chabahar, and rebuild the energy architecture that the sanctions had destroyed. 2 months, one window. No time to waste. To understand what Iran sanctions relief means for India, you need to go back to where the crisis began. On February 28th, the US and Israel launched military strikes against Iran. Iran responded by closing the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's entire oil and gas supply moves every single day. The consequences were immediate and brutal. The Indian crude basket price surged from $69 per barrel in February to $113 per barrel in March, a 64% jump in a single month. Iraq, which is India's second largest oil supplier and almost entirely dependent on the Strait for its exports, effectively stopped sending oil. India gets about 40% of its crude through Hormuz. For 4 months, most of that supply was nearly offline. India's energy ministry scrambled. Refiners were directed to source from over 40 countries simultaneously. Russian crude doubled. Venezuelan barrels were increased. West African producers, Nigeria and Angola stepped in. It worked, but at a significant cost. Transportation from Russia is far more expensive than shipping from the Persian Gulf. Insurance premiums on tankers spiked. Landed energy costs went up across the Indian economy. There was a time when Iran was India's most important energy partners. Before American sanctions returned in 2018, Iran was among India's top oil suppliers. Indian refiners preferred Iranian crude because it was competitively priced and suited to Indian refiners. Iran also offered favorable payment mechanisms and shipping arrangements. But then came the sanctions. India was forced to stop imports. Delhi had to make a choice. It gradually shifted towards suppliers like Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, and eventually Russia. Now the equation could change once again. If Iranian crude returns to international markets in a meaningful way, India gains another major source of energy. More suppliers means more competition, and more competition usually means better prices. Global oil markets operate on supply and demand. When more oil enters the market, prices usually face downward pressure. Iran possesses one of the world's largest oil reserves. A significant return of Iranian imports would increase global supply. This could help moderate crude prices. So for India, Even a small reduction in prices creates enormous savings. A few dollars less per barrel can translate into billions of dollars saved annually. These savings can support economic growth. They reduce inflationary pressure and they strengthen India's overall economic position. India is also looking at another big opportunity, the Chabahar port. India has spent hundreds of millions of dollars in developing the Shahid terminal at Chabahar, Iran's deep sea port on the Indian Ocean. It signed a 10-year contract through India Ports Global Limited. The port was strangled by US sanctions. However, the new MOU's 7th clause commits Washington to, and I quote here, terminate all types of sanctions against Iran in an agreed upon schedule as a part of the final deal. So if this holds, Chabahar comes alive. And Chabahar is India's strategic gateway to Afghanistan and Central Asia, completely bypassing Pakistan. Here is the part of this story that has been making India deeply uncomfortable. As Gulf supplies dried up, India turned to Russia and turned hard. By March, Indian refiners were buying 2 million barrels per day of Russian crude, almost double the level from February. By June, Kepler, the global commodity analytics firm, estimated that India's Russian crude imports would hit an all-time record of 2.35 million barrels per day, accounting for an extraordinary 53.5% of all Indian imports. But here is the problem. India was only able to do this because the US allowed it. The Trump administration has repeatedly issued sanction waivers allowing Indian refiners to buy Russian oil without triggering secondary American sanctions and penalties. That waiver expired on June 19th, and Washington's position on renewing it remains unclear. But the return of Iran oil trade is not a straightforward victory. The MOU is a 60-day framework, not a final deal. It is fragile. Tehran is floating the idea of transit charges on shipping after the ceasefire window closes. That would permanently raise the cost of energy moving through the Strait for everyone, including India. The US sanction waiver on Russian oil has lapsed, and while the Indian refiners have found workarounds, the legal exposure is real. If Washington reimposes secondary sanctions on Russian oil buyers, India faces a difficult transition back to Middle Eastern supply at a moment when Gulf producers like Iraq need weeks, if not months, to restore its full export capacity. So here is the bottom line. The US and Iran deal has handed India a strategic window. Iran oil is available. Prices are falling. Chabahar can breathe again. The INSTC has a future. And India's dependence on American permission to buy Russian crude can be gradually reduced as the Gulf suppliers return. But windows close. The MOU runs until August 21st. India needs to move quickly on 3 fronts. Re-establish Iranian crude purchase contracts while the license is valid. Accelerate Chabahar operations and secure legal clarity under the new sanctions framework. And negotiate INSTC's revival with Iran and Russia as a long-term hedge against any future Hormuz closure. For 4 months, the world's 3rd largest oil importer was at the mercy of a war it did not start, in a strait it does not control. That is the vulnerability the Iran deal can help fix. The question is whether New Delhi is moving fast enough to seize this moment.